My name is Paul Morris. I'm an art dealer, and I've produced about 80 art fairs in my life, and I've probably visited about 450. Today, David asked me, as he explained, to talk about what determines the value of contemporary art, or as he then said to me, or better put, why is one brushstroke on a canvas sell for millions of dollars? And I started thinking about the question, and it made me organize my talk, or made me think I should organize my talk into sort of three parts. One is, I'd like to talk about myself and explain how I got here and why David asked me, and in the process it sort of describes the art market. And the second part would just be a dialogue about what art is, because it's very subjective. And then I'll explain the list of factors that then produce or support price for contemporary work of art. First of all, I came to New York with a BA from Grinnell College in art history. I was fortunate enough to get an internship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where 5 days a week I got to just explore that museum in every possible way. On Mondays, they took us around to different art organizations around the city. On Tuesday and Wednesday, I worked in a department called Special Publications, and I wandered around the museum collecting cat images for cat calendars. The whole point of the department was to make money off the collection. Then 2 days a week, I sat at the front desk, and as an undergraduate, I was deep in theory, and all of a sudden I got to see reality. And I sat at the front desk at the Metropolitan, and people came in and asked me where the dinosaurs were, where the Mona Lisa was. And it really sort of spoke to our prejudices or our generalizations about what art is. And if it's a museum, it's got to have the Mona Lisa in it. And then giving the tours, I would get all kinds of questions. And the thing that was sort of shocking to me at first, though, was that people listened to me. And part of that was because I had the aura of art around me. I had the Tiepolo at the top of the steps. My name was listed on the board as Paul Morris giving a tour at the Metropolitan. And it made people think I was really smart, or that I was part of this bigger organization. I worked for a gallery in London after that. I came back and worked for a gallery in New York for 7 years. I returned to London and worked for another gallery. And then I came back to New York and I opened my own gallery. And at that point, the 80s were a roaring period for the art market, and the 90s then were a very dramatic crash. And the art world at that point had two art fairs that everyone gathered at. It was our industry's meeting points. One was in Chicago, which was the American Art Fair, and one was in Basel, Switzerland, which was the European Art Fair. And at that point, there were no art fairs really in developing nations: China, Russia, Brazil, India. And we had all participated in the 80s, and with the crash, we all sort of broke, and we wanted to figure out a way that we could all still keep doing art fairs. And three friends of mine came over, and we kept thinking about the idea of a hotel art fair where you would take over the room. And so your rent was essentially what it cost to have the room. If you kept the phone bill down and the room service under control, you possibly could afford to do this. We also, Misery Loves Company, we wanted to all get together again and sort of endure this depressed art market together. So we ordered Chinese food, we plot and planned, we went to the Gramercy Park Hotel before it was renovated, and we had noticed that the lobby was always filled with like a punk rock band from Berlin or a soccer team from Dublin, and when you paid your bill, it was more like a check cashing situation where it was bulletproof, so the bar was set very low for the venue. We took over the top 3 floors. There were 60 galleries that participated, they each got their own room. Some of the permanent residents refused to move, and they became part of the process as well. And we really didn't know what we were getting into. And I'm giving you this speech not so much to talk about me, but innovation. So keep that in mind as I go through this whole chat. Every time we met with the bank moving officer, he acted as if it were a whole new world and he just met us for the first time. And that started to scare us because we were really having an event that was coming there. And we kind of soft-sold it as a bunch of like-minded individuals getting together to share ideas. I can remember when we pulled up to the hotel, it looked like the scene in the Ten Commandments when the Israelites left Egypt. There were canvases, trucks, crates, all this being unloaded. And I turned to my friend Pat and I said, we're busted. We tried to soft sell it, now we're in trouble. We walked in and the hotel acted like it was just one more day there. They didn't say a word about it. We went into it. We broke all their banqueting records. We broke the elevators. People were were walking 16 floors. I was standing on my furniture in my room because the way we installed the art was to somehow tack it to the walls, tie it to the walls, prop it. I laid out drawings on a bed. I ended up having to stand on my dresser because the room was so packed with people. People love art. They want to be a part of it. It was a depressed market. It was the most joyful thing that we could have possibly done, just to bring us all together to get validated for what we were doing. We were then invited by the owner of that hotel to do it at the Raleigh Hotel in Florida and the Chateau Marmont. And so for 5 years we did 3 versions of this, constantly cycling new dealers. As word spread, more people started to apply for it. We were begging for people to be a part of it. People were asking to be a part of it. And then we started to come up with entertainment. And we had John Waters do his stand-up act one Saturday night in the Chateau Marmont. We had Amanda Plummer do poetry. Bridget Berlin, one of Warhol's hangers-on, an essential part of the factory, did breast prints that were then handed out. If you go on YouTube, you can see me distributing these as she was sort of blowing her breasts onto a print and then handing it out, put her sweater back on and took off. It was very, let's do it all together, we'll all work together. It was very low budget, and it really hit a great nerve, and the press loved it. And in fact, David Ross, who was the director of the Whitney at that point, came to us and said, I can't bring my trustees here unless you charge them to come in. They won't respect you. And we had never thought of that either. We were really just, at that point my life was so desperate that staying at the Gramercy Park Hotel for 3 days was my vacation, and I loved it. And the Chateau Marmont was a bit more glamorous. So, fast forward 5 years, the market started to come back. We've got a bit of a war chest, and we rent the Downtown Armory, which was a real gift to us because that's where the 1913 Armory Show took place, and Americans first saw Duchamp, they first saw modernism, and a flurry of cartoons came out of that, which, Google it, and you'll see how that poor new descending staircase was ripped apart. And I think Teddy Roosevelt declared it was a male coming down. Like, there was all kinds of debate over it. In any event, we really loved to get the venue, and once again, it was kind of shell-shocked veterans ran the place, and we had to kind of keep, reminding them we're coming here. So there were 70 dealers, and it was a huge success again. And all of a sudden, we had 600 applications for the next version. And we went to Javits, where we had 90 dealers, and we ended up settling at the Piers with 150 dealers. And it was all contemporary art dealers. We all represented working artists. That was sort of the mission statement of it. It couldn't be secondary market work, which is, in the art world, there's primary and secondary. Primary is you get the work directly from the artist. Secondary is your parents bought Picasso, and now you bring it to me 50 years later and you want to sell it. It had to be primary market. People really had to be engaged in it. Fast forward, the fair's going really well, and in 2007 we sold the fair, and I continued to work for the corporation that bought it for 6 years, and I produced 8 fairs a year, and in the end it was 80 fairs altogether. And I left that, and in that time I started thinking there's got to be a new model now. I started by selling $500 drawings off of the bedspread, and the world now is much larger. The art world is much larger. There's emerging nations. Before you couldn't get into China, now you have to go 3 times a year. There's a fair in Shanghai, Hong Kong, there's a fair in Sao Paulo, Dubai, all over the place. And I thought to myself, I've got to create a part in the art world that I really love, and so I created this show called Chosen, and the mission statement was to show art that would go into a museum. It was to show art in anything but a white box, and I only invited people who were starting their own museums, because I noticed over those 6 years that in the emerging nations there's a real urge to start museums. Museums are all started the same way. It's the same way that the Housewives started the Museum of Modern Art, or the Robert Baron started the Metropolitan. You get together with a private urge to make it public, which eventually becomes a public institution. And I thought, let's do a TED conference for those people. Let's let the emerging nations learn from the established private museums, and they can learn from the successes and failures, etc. So we wanted to do that at first, and I thought, no, let's do an exhibition. So if I were to kind of generalize, it was a 1-gallery art fair. I picked out 42 works from some of the greatest dealers in the world and some of the greatest artists, and I put them under my roof, and I showed the work in an abandoned law firm from 1882 that had been left desolate for 40 years and had this incredible rot to it that was extraordinary. The artists loved the installation. It was a big hit, and to give you context for what we're doing now, the Original hotel fare, we charge people $50 to be in it. Those same dealers are now paying $70,000 for a booth in the Armory show. And the art fair that I started were from 200,000 to 30 million. And I really wanted to just talk to museums. I wanted to help people who are underwriting culture. I wanted to bring them all together so they can learn from each other. So anyway, that's my story. In that you can sort of see the evolution of the art world and the art market and how it expanded, and hopefully we'll get to pricing in a minute. I needed to talk about what is art, because in David's question he said, well, why does a stroke on a painting sell for millions of dollars? It belies a conflict and a prejudice in the art world that the art world endures, and that is realism is better than abstraction. If I can make it, it's not worth as much as something I can't make. And as a sidebar to that, before I forget, I invite you all to go to the Neue Gallery in Manhattan and see this exhibition called Degenerate Art, because Hitler felt that abstraction was a degenerate Jewish mind, a communist mind, where realism, these high ideals of sort of like muscular blondes portrayed in romantic Teutonic settings, was better than all of this abstract art. But he didn't mind abstraction if he could send it to Switzerland and be sold for hard cash. So I invite you to go see that. And then I also want to ask you a few other questions. In the world if I were to broad stroke art history, you have cave paintings. The Greeks understand realism. It's forgotten. It's been reinvented in the Italian Renaissance. Then we get, and it's celebrated up until the First World War, and then Cubism starts to break it down, and realism is deconstructed. And then that is where abstraction really takes off. And then you really have a fight. And one of these fights really comes to head when you have Jackson Pollock. What is more real? He's saying, I'm putting splattering paint on a canvas, and that's all it is. That's what you see. Isn't that more real than, say, someone who actually has the technical skill to do the illusion of depth in a realist painting? And so I have to kind of take some of these prejudices out of the equation so that we can see that what art is like any other industry, and it is a commodity, and it is sold, and innovation is rewarded in it. And as we go forward, I can push that envelope further with realism versus abstraction, in the sense of there's an Italian artist named Piero Manzoni who declared that one of my friend's arms was a work of art, and it was taken so seriously that when she was going through a divorce, that had to be valued when they split up the property. Sherry Levine is this extraordinary artist working these days, and she's a woman, and she realized that the history of art is all about men, and she thought, well, if I'm going to have a career, I have to actually co-opt a man's career first to get any attention, and that's what she did. She re-photographed Stieglitz photographs and called them re-photographed and put them out there. And that's how appropriation is articulated through a lot of different, appropriation is a movement, and it's articulated by many different artists. So let's get to why things are priced the way they are. So once you start to agree that abstraction and realism can compete on the same plane, these art movements and these art objects then have to be priced, and they are put into a market that also takes over the pricing of it. So as basic as it is, I think first of all, rent can determine what an initial price is for artwork that goes out into the world from the very beginning, when an artist's career just starts. When I started in this business, you could start with $500 for a drawing, and now I find if I go to younger art fairs, everything starts at $5,000, which I think is, my space in Manhattan started at $2,300 and it currently rents for $25,000. So it costs money to be in this business. And then, but more importantly, it's consensus. And consensus is the entire art world agreeing this is a good artist, and these are the prices that they should get, and collectors are fighting for it, so the prices might go up a little bit more than what it would be on the primary market. So what helps that? Press helps that. A good New York Times review helps that. A one-person museum show helps that. A group show where you're included in a museum, that also helps it. And an economist in Germany in the, I think the 80s, was able to assign points to how you got more points for having a one-person show at a museum than it being in a group show at a museum. If a museum buys your work, that also raises the value of what it sells for. And the best sell I can make as an art dealer is to a museum, because A, the museum validates it as serious work, B, it'll never be sold again, it'll never go into auction, and C, it'll travel, and there'll be writings about it, and there'll be books about it, and that'll also beef up the market. Also, getting it into the right collections. I don't want to sell, and it sounds very snobby, I don't want to sell to a collector, I want to sell to a custodian. Someone who realizes that they are not as permanent as art is, and they're collecting it, and they want to give it to a museum eventually. I want to get all of my artist work into museums, and that beefs up the value of it, that determines what things will sell for, and it creates a flurry at an auction, which is the last point I'll make. Books. The more monographs that the artist has, the better off they are. Curators, if curators validate the work. Dealers, if I show the work, I want to get it into another good dealer. And it's not that far away from like creating a shopping mall. You want all the great stores together in one strip, and that raises the quality of everything else in there. So you want to have a chain of dealers around the world that all get the same high note. You want to be shown with artists that are celebrated as you are, and that all gets a high note. And finally, auctions are the most public moment where your work can be valued. And an auction can depend on who's in the room, but also on the marketing that the auction house has done. So I've got a minute left. I hope I kind of broke down some prejudice about art, but I hope that you understand that it's a bias system that many factors come together to produce what is actually the final selling price, and things can go up and things can go down. You should take a long-term view of what you're buying and what the prices will be, and if an artist will come in and out of favor. So once again, all these factors build consensus. I never got to my cartoons, but I did a Google search of the New Yorker, and you can spend hours there. And I think this is the grandfather of what art can and cannot be. If the artist says it's art, it's art. And if they sign a urinal and put it out there, as Duchamp did, then you have to start considering how much you're going to price it out. Thank you.